I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Jonah and the Whale, St. George and the Dragon, Ellen Ripley and the xenomorph from Alien. Throughout the history of human civilization, monsters have appeared in our parables. The monster is that scary other that was talked about around those first campfires. And usually the only purpose for the monster is to eat you. Now there's a specific type of monster, like Jonah's whale, the xenomorph, and the dragon that is unique. They are lizard-like or amphibious, and they aren't created by full moons or curses. They feel organic, like they have always been there, like they are part of the earth. Perhaps that's because these monsters, especially the dragon, may be based on creatures that really existed. And part of our fear may be that deep down we realize that we are the others, trespassing on land owned by ancient beasts. There was a time when the world was owned by dinosaurs. And today, my guests, Garret and Sabrina from the I Know Dino Podcast, are here to talk about dinosaurs and monsters. Every week, they discuss new dinosaur discoveries and events from around the world. And today, we're going to talk about monster movies with monsters that were real, the dinosaurs. Folks, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I love when people follow their passions. And so I was overjoyed when I saw your website for your podcast, iknowdino.com. You folks aren't just casual fans of dinosaurs. I mean, you've had paleontologists as guests on your show, and you basically go toe-to-toe with them. So, I love when there's something that really connects you to the thing that you have passion for. Tell us a little bit about, what made it that you couldn't just be spectators anymore. You had to go and create something yourself.
I think that was mostly Garrett's idea.
Oh, yeah. So I guess when we first met, because we're married, by the way, when we first met, we didn't realize that we both loved dinosaurs, but we moved to the East Coast and we were living near the American Museum of Natural History. And after going a few times, we were like, oh, wow.
Yeah, you like dinosaurs? I like dinosaurs.
Yeah,
we can talk about this now?
Exactly. So we started a website, and then eventually that just progressed into a podcast, partly when we realized that there weren't any dinosaur podcasts out there, really. So we wanted to make one.
It's pretty astonishing to me because I think one of the, of course, I'm speaking as a male growing up in the 60s. I didn't know any young kid that wasn't into dinosaurs. I mean, I had every dinosaur possible, the models that they used to have, all the books, the charts, all that stuff drove my dad crazy speaking Latin. And I didn't know I was speaking Latin. And it was so much fun. So I'm always surprised when things like this I hear where there's no other dinosaur podcast. And that just goes to the kind of passion that we have, this sense of play when we're kids that we kind of lose. Mm-hmm. And how important I think that the breath of fresh air there is when we do create for others what we feel inside of us. Now, it's obvious you're fascinated with dinosaurs as much as I am with the horror genre. Mm-hmm. For me, horror didn't just scare me. It helped me get through some serious traumas as a child. It also helped me find a community. It helped me find a voice for myself. So I was wondering, what is it about dinosaurs that you connect so deeply with and emotionally? I know the look of them is one thing, but what is it that really hits you in the gut?
I think the fact that they're so strange and there's so many of them and that they lived so long, like the time between, this fact still blows my mind, but the time between when Stegosaurus, the one with the spikes and the plates, lived, and then T-Rex, which is one of the most famous ones, and then the time between when T-Rex lived and now, oh no, I did that wrong. But the time between when Stegosaurus and T-Rex lived is actually longer than the time between when T-Rex lived and now.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a ton of history there. It's similar to a line about Egyptians, where apparently to Cleopatra, the pyramids were ancient and like more ancient to her than Cleopatra is to us. So there's this perspective thing that once you start to dig into a topic and you realize just how much is in there, and then you just get further and further and further into it.
You think about time in a whole different way.
Oh, yeah.
And so all of these things kind of brings together a really nice community, one of the friendliest communities I think we've ever come across.
Yeah, your use of the word community is spot on, because when we started the podcast, we thought we would get a fair amount of pushback, because when we started it, we didn't know that much about dinosaurs. We definitely weren't going toe-to-toe with paleontologists. We were saying stuff like, so that dinosaur actually did have feathers. And they'd be like, yeah, we've known that for 20 years. Like, come on, who is this guy? But people were very, they're just happy to talk about it. They just want to share their passion. And it's just an amazing group. So, yeah.
And a lot of different things come out of it. You've got all kinds of artists or people doing even theater projects around it, and all kinds of things.
One example we give a lot is a guy named Arya Rudenko, and he grew up in Washington State in the US, and he kind of was out in nature a lot as a kid, and later he got into dance theater, and he actually went over to Southeast Asia. I think he was in Thailand or maybe the Philippines, but he was
Indonesia. He was in Indonesia.
You're right. So he was in Indonesia, and he met a group of people that live with their chickens in a community, and they actually have certain mannerisms that sort of interpret what the chicken do. And he made a whole dance with these people interpreting how chickens move and turning that into dinosaurs, because dinosaurs evolved into birds. Right. And now he's it's growing, and he's starting to make these big stage presentations of dancing like dinosaurs. It's something you'd never think of.
Right.
Chicken dancer.
Yeah, I didn't want to call it the chicken dance, of course. But so it's funny that you mentioned looking at history or time. You didn't say history as much as you said time. My wife's a microbiologist, so we get into these conversations about time. And, we went to Iceland. She's like, this is such a young country. It's only 8 million years old, And so, you hear that kind of thing. As you're discovering, since you didn't start out as both of you having degrees in this and then deciding to take that passion and turning it into a podcast, you started as people who just had a love for it. What is the biggest thing that you have seen as a change in your perspective about history or time in what you've been learning?
I think that it's probably that same sort of thing. We were actually in Hawaii not too long ago, and we were on a tour, and they said something about Hawaii being such an old country and this old culture, and it was exactly the same as Iceland. We're like, it's a volcanic island. It's one of the newest pieces of land on Earth. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I think that one was about 10 million years. Oh, that's so young.
What are you talking about? But it also brings perspective into evolution too, because people talk about evolution a lot, and we'll talk about mass extinctions and climate change and things like that. And there's a lot of that in the paleontological record that gives you a lot of context about just how slowly things change and how many different things there are out there. Like with dinosaurs, they keep discovering these new creatures, and no one could have possibly imagined it. It's like the stranger than fiction cliche, because it's always something, and you're like, what?
Or in some cases, they look like fiction because one's been described as looking like Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because for me, I was a huge dinosaur fan. But until Jurassic Park, I had never heard of a velociraptor. I thought they made it up. I was like, what? I had every book. And I think the velociraptor was found in the 1920s, right?
So yeah, it's from Mongolia.
I'm not that old. So I was like, how did I miss this? And I know that it took a little bit of time, and there was much more research that needed to be done and needed to go through scientific method. But was it really Jurassic Park that broke the velociraptor, or was I just way behind the times?
I think, let me just double check real quick, because then I can get the year right. It actually was officially described, so it was established in science in 1924, and it just took that long for it to make its way into pop culture.
That's one of the things that I love about Crichton. I mean, he did that a lot in his work, is that he had a love for that form of science. But we were talking about history and time, and you mentioned, Sabrina, that the time between the Stegosaurus and the T-Rex was longer than the time between us and the T-Rex. So I wanted to talk about my intro, where I talked about these parables that are always talking about these monsters that somehow have an awful, I mean, a dragon, that's kind of on the nose with what we think about for dinosaurs. But these tales, they seemed to be about dinosaurs, but there was a big gap, not as big as, say, T-Rex and us, but there was a big gap where, hey, there's no paleontologists back at the first campfire. There were no dinosaurs when there was a first campfire. They were separate epochs and events. So how do you think the dinosaur made it through extinction to being conjured into early man's parables?
I think there's a lot of records that they left behind with their fossils, but also with their things like their footprints have fossilized. And so there's an example in, is it Australia, where they had these giant footprints. And as we know, dinosaurs evolved into birds. So they're very bird-like footprints, but huge. And there's a legend there about an emu man, where they just thought it was a giant man with bird feet that walked around.
Yeah. And similarly in China, too, where a lot of the dragon legends come from, it's a great place to find Mesozoic dinosaur fossils. So we now think that these, people thousands of years ago dug up a dinosaur bone, not knowing what it was, and then pieced together, it must be this big creature. And the legend of dinosaurs or the legend of dragons grew out of these actual dinosaur fossils.
So you mentioned Mesozoic. How about, given those of us who aren't as well versed as you, you mentioned that there's a huge time period between different dinosaurs. And you also mentioned that evolution takes a long time. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of a couple different eras or ages and a dinosaur that so we can almost visually see them shaping?
Sure, yeah. So I would say you could probably break down dinosaurs into three groups or three periods. So you have the Triassic, then the Jurassic, and then the Cretaceous. And it's kind of funny because the movie's called Jurassic Park, but most of the most famous dinosaurs are from the Cretaceous, even the ones in that movie. So it should probably be called Cretaceous Park.
Just doesn't have the same ring to it.
It doesn't.
Right.
But the very earliest dinosaurs, so in the Triassic, you had a mass extinction that started the dinosaurs' reign. So there were other animals that were kind of ruling the earth. And then massive changes on Earth wiped out all those animals. And the dinosaurs were just in the right sort of evolutionary spot to expand and take over everything. And they were all small with two legs. They all ate meat and they were all quick. They had long tails, and the tails were potentially helpful for running a little faster, which is why we think they might have taken over. And then there was another extinction event in between the Triassic and the Jurassic, and that's when they really started to diversify. We started to get big herbivores, and we started to get a lot of these different branches that eventually led to things like Stegosaurus versus Triceratops and stuff like that. And then in the Cretaceous, that's when we started to see flying dinosaurs. That's when we think birds were really getting going. You saw T-Rex.
Well, that's when Triceratops was too.
Oh yeah, that's when Triceratops, the big ceratopsians with the horns on their head. Mm-hmm. Things like T-Rex, the really big predators, at least in North America. And what all else is going on there? Oh, and you had the duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, which were incredibly important, potentially even to the evolution of modern plants, starting to pop up in the Cretaceous. So I think of the Cretaceous as the most important part of the age of dinosaurs, but the Jurassic's also pretty good.
I'm laughing because this is my kind of stuff. I love to geek out on things like this, and I'm thinking about when my wife listens to this, so she'll have a good laugh now. If we're talking about dinosaurs ruling the earth and other things, and she's like, "I'm a microbiologist. Microbes have always owned the world. They still own the world. We're just renting real estate here."
This is true.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that too when I talked about things evolving quickly or slowly. The only thing that is the exception to that are microbes. They evolve pretty quick compared to everything else. Most of these dinosaurs we estimate were around for about 2 million years. And then from the beginning of the Triassic with dinosaurs to the end of the Cretaceous is like about 150 million years. So you could think of it as maybe 70 different sets of dinosaurs throughout that whole time period. But microbes, I don't know, there's probably billions of them.
Oh my goodness. I see another podcast happening. two of you guys just having a conversation about this. So, obviously, I talk about horror movies a lot. My passion is the horror film, and most movies with dinosaurs, they're not very kind to the dinosaurs. But I love horror films, and the monster movie. Invariably, most of the movies that have dinosaurs in them fall into that category of the monster movie. I'm assuming that those would be your favorite horror films, but I have a thing that I call the first kiss that I always ask about. And I'll share my dinosaur love after you share me your horror movie love. But the first kiss is the movie that got you into that genre and just made you a fan for life, if you are. So, Garrett, you want to start with your first kiss?
Sure. I'm not sure if this qualifies, but I think it would be Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
It was
I know a lot of people who love that.
Yeah, it was the first movie I saw in a theater, I think, which can probably make you figure out how old I am. And it came out the same year as Jurassic Park, but I think since Nightmare Before Christmas was like G or PG or something, my parents were probably more okay with me seeing that. But yeah, it actually gave me nightmares, but I still loved it. It was like the combination of it scared the crap out of me, but I also just loved the movie. And I loved Nightmare Before Christmas too has a lot of sort of critical thinking going on. They're trying to figure out this world that's so different than their own, and they're just completely overwhelmed by the differences, and they can't make sense of it for the longest time. And then eventually there's sort of an epiphany about, there are these different things going on in the world, and, this is how they interrelate. So that's why I love that movie. And that kind of led me down this path of horror movies, I think.
I find I give that movie a special dispensation. Normally in my definitions of horror and everything, it might not make it, but this one certainly does, because there are so many diehard horror fans. I mean, guys that are tattooed from head to toe, and they're like, "Oh, I love that." They've got Jack Skellington hanging out of their pocket and things. So it's so much. I think why it makes it into the horror pantheon is because it epitomizes Halloween. Mm-hmm. It has that energy of how we look and celebrate Halloween. It has a glee to it that is all about death, and yet somehow we're having that gleeful moment. So, Sabrina, how about yourself?
Well, mine's going to be very on the nose, but it's Jurassic Park.
Of course. Yeah.
Of course. And I have memories I didn't see it in theater, but we must have rented it or something, because I have memories of watching it with my cousin and my younger sister. And then there's that kitchen scene with the velociraptor, and it's really tense and everything. And we would run into the kitchen and hide, kind of peek out, wait for that scene to see how it played out. And then go back in to watch the rest of the movie.
You run to the kitchen for the scene where the velociraptors are in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You may have just liked the thrill a little bit more than you're admitting. You went to the kitchen.
Right.
True.
I mean, Jurassic Park's wonderful, and I know we'll get into conversation about that. The look of it is truly stunning for someone who grew up with like the island of or the Valley of Gwangi and the beasts from 220,000 fathoms and Godzilla. Seeing the first Brachiosaurus appear is like, what? And it was just like, it was really amazing, and it's got great scares in it for the kind of film it is. It certainly wants to thrill you as well, which I think is great, and sometimes makes those scares a little bit stronger. So I guess I'll give a little bit about I was so in love with, of all things, the Brontosaurus, the Stegosaurus, and the Triceratops. I was scared to death of the T-Rex. When I was a kid, I didn't like him at all, because I had one of those How and Why books. Mm-hmm. And the How and Why book had a picture of the Tyrannosaurus Rex on a Brontosaurus, biting it in the neck, and blood coming off of it. And I was like, oh, but I like the big dumb guy that only eats lettuce. And I'm like, how could this be happening? And then the next one was the Triceratops just gutting, just stabbing its spikes or its horns into the belly of a T-Rex that's going, oh. And I was like, yes. But only later, as I became more cynical as a horror film guy, did I start really going for the T-Rex as well. But it always felt very much like they were built to be scary just by the look of them. And that's maybe why I like the Brontosaurus. When I was really, really a scared kid, he was somehow like a kind dinosaur, even though, he could probably destroy me and not even know it because he's stepping where I was or bring a tree down on top of me. But just the look of him was so much. I know that we're going to talk about horror movies. We may as well start diving into it because, of course, dinosaurs, because of that look, just like so many others that we talk about in films, it's the book by its cover. You look at it and it becomes this thing, this icon almost immediately when you see the visual. You're lovers of these guys. How do you deal with the stuff in horror films that's unkind to the lovely dinosaur?
Well, the fact that you mentioned these big sauropods, the long neck dinosaurs dying off, this seems to happen in almost every movie. And that's Sabrina's favorite type of dinosaur. So I think you should.
Oh, I guess you just sort of get used to it. It's kind of take it all in stride, I guess. Like at this point, I know what to expect. So it's more of this is an entertaining kind of movie for me. So I don't know if that's, I don't know. How do you do it, Garrett?
Well, it doesn't bother me as much because my favorite is the ankylosaur, which is the kind of tank-like one. And those almost never die in the movies because it's just figuring out a way to kill it off. It's not all that exciting. And the
big mace on the tail. Whap, whap, whap.
Yeah.
I do try to feel more empathy for the carnivores now. Because there's always another side to it. They've got their own young to take care of or whatever motivations, just trying to survive just like the rest of them.
Yep.
Oh, this is going to be a great conversation. So what are some of the ways that horror movies portray dinosaurs that accentuate the fear factor? Because horror movies use dinosaurs for stand-ins for something that we currently fear, just like they do with all of the others. And of course, dinosaurs being big, it's probably big issues. But what are some of the ways that horror movies portray dinosaurs that you think accentuates the fear factor?
Well, you already said one of them, which is at least in Jurassic Park, or maybe not in the first movie, but definitely in the later movies, they scaled every dinosaur up by at least 50%. So,
well, even Velociraptor in the first one.
Velociraptor in real life is about, I don't know, the size of a small dog. It's not a large animal. There were other relatives to Velociraptor that were bigger, and actually around the time they made the movie, they discovered one that was around the size of the one in the movie.
Right. They were going to give Spielberg credit for naming it, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
It was kind of...
So, I mean, that's an obvious way. You just make the big, scary things bigger. They also made some of them more ferocious, and the other piece of it is, say with T-Rex, Sabrina was talking about how they had families and they were trying to survive and everything. We think that a lot of the predatory dinosaurs were actually really good caregivers. In nature, a lot of times you'll see animals that rely on hunting are really the better parents because they have to teach the young how to hunt. Whereas something like a cow, you don't have to teach them how to eat grass.
Right. And actually,
right there.
The sauropods may have just laid their eggs and left them.
Exactly. But weirdly, a lot of times sauropods are picked as like the protagonist with a family, which is kind of the opposite. And so for the villainous dinosaurs like the T-Rex, they never really show the parental care side of it, which we all think is likely. And so it's making them more of this fearful monster creature than it probably would have been in real life.
They're just angry. We don't always know why.
So that's interesting because the things that you're saying fly in the face of what we think of for the difference between cold-blooded and warm-blooded, right? You know, when we talk about the lizard brain and we talk about the reptilian personality and all of that, we don't think about parenting, or not just parenting, just the idea of mammalian connectivity of tribe. You don't see a tribe of snakes very often and stuff like that. So it's interesting. That's a logical fallacy, right? So what are some of the common logical fallacies about dinosaurs in movies?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of them, the lizard distinction. And really the way that scientists, when they're researching what dinosaurs are like, what they look to is birds, because birds are much closer relatives to dinosaurs than something like a crocodile. So if you think about birds, they're always in flocks. There's always big groups of them. They have a nest. They're taking care of their young, that kind of thing. So that's a big fallacy right out of the gate. This lack of care. Along with that goes sort of their overall speed. Up until Jurassic Park, at least, they were generally really slow, lumbering, sort of brutish monsters, like a Loch Ness monster or something kind of creature. Right. Whereas really, Jurassic Park, it showed them, running, chasing jeeps. You had the stampede of Gallimimus running through the fields. So, yeah, they were definitely quick, which I think has mostly been corrected thanks to Jurassic Park.
Also, because of Jurassic Park, they're now depicted as smarter. Because before that, they were seen as these lumbering giants with no brains kind of thing.
Yeah. I also think it's kind of funny because there's this really clear delineation of friendly herbivores and mean carnivores that happens. And really, a lot of the most violent animals that you'll find in nature are herbivores. So like hippopotamus, you don't want to mess with them. You don't mess with like rhinos or buffalo. Like you keep your distance. And if you think about like an analogy for a triceratops, it's basically like a rhino, except with bigger, sharper horns. So it's not going to be a friendly creature to be around. Whereas something like a small carnivorous animal could be like a house cat or something, it's probably just going to want to stay away from you if you're bigger than it. And unless it's hunting you, it's not going to be roaring at you and chasing you around.
Well, even when it's hunting, it probably won't be making sounds.
That's another huge one. Dinosaurs definitely wouldn't have roared when they were chasing things because they're trying to sneak up on their prey.
So what's interesting about what you talked about was the connotation between slow lumbering and peaceful, and how because it's really big, it would be slow. Now, would the Brontosaurus be slow, or would it actually be moving at a pretty good pace?
I think it would be slow, but it's
so big that it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, it's interesting because something like an elephant, a lot of times they'll look at elephants with Brontosaurus because it's not really a good analog, but it's just the best we can do. It's like a big four-legged heavy thing. And elephants can run faster than people. They do some pretty good charges. So maybe these big sauropods could have run, or at least walked, when their legs are that long, they don't really have to be fully running even to cover a lot of distance. But yeah, and then some of the dinosaurs, some of the smaller sauropods, we think could go on their back legs.
Oh, yeah. Or sometimes even as they were young, before they became large enough to where their bigness protected them, they could run on two legs to get away from predators.
Well, I'm interested because this is kind of a sign of how film as an art form can really alter people's perceptions. Because I'm wondering, it was kind of considered that they were fast in the science world for most of the time, correct?
I think there's a book called The Dinosaur Heresies, and it came out, I believe, in the 1970s, maybe the 1980s, by a guy named Bob Bacher. And he actually is sort of the basis of the paleontologist in Jurassic Park. But he was the one that really emphasized that dinosaurs probably weren't cold-blooded, probably had a higher metabolism and moved around a little more quickly.
Him and John Ostrom. Ostrom was his kind of mentor.
Yeah. So the notion that dinosaurs were slow and lizard-like really was the general consensus up until maybe even the 80s.
Right.
Wow.
Well, because if you look at, if you've ever heard of the Crystal Palace dinosaurs in the UK, this is in the Victorian era, where they made the first, they were the first replicas or statues of dinosaurs that they knew at the time. And they all look very lizard-like because back then they just thought they were 20 times bigger than a lizard and also slow and lumbering. So that kind of started early on with paleontology.
Okay, well, that's good to know because I was trying to think about how freeing technology was for Spielberg to allow that to happen, because prior to that, it's pretty much Ray Harryhausen doing stop motion. And I mean, you can't have a galloping brontosaurus. It'd be a nightmare. I mean, even a galloping guy was a nightmare when they did the blue screen with it. So I was thinking about how perceptions come from what we're able to identify visually and cinematically, and how powerful the image is. So talking about these things, these fallacies and the fear factor that's in there, monsters, as I mentioned before, are stand-ins for real-world anxieties for the most part. And horror movies are tailor-made for allegory and culture, or allegory and metaphor. And sometimes they can't help but comment on the anxieties of the culture. And even the bad ones can't help but talk about the things that are happening that are driving people crazy. So let's play What's the Metaphor? So I know that you have probably a list of movies that have to do with dinosaurs or monsters. We can talk whatever you'd like, but I'd love to see how some of your favorite dinosaur films, what the dinosaur stands in for in a social or cultural, political sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm hoping you'll help me with this too, because I'm not a big film person, so I can see like the top layer, but I bet there's a lot more that you can see underneath it. So I guess we might as well start with Jurassic Park. The allegory there, I think, has to be a fear of science, basically, because Michael Crichton put that into almost all of his books. And even, I think one of the last books he published was sort of an anti-climate change book called State of Fear that was like really behind the times. So yeah, he has all these lines in there about, you...
Just because you can do something, should you do it? And what are the implications? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
The chaos theory, all that.
Yeah.
Right.
And just how, we can fall victim to our own hubris and things like that. But that's kind of a unique take on dinosaurs, I think. I don't think most dinosaur movies are in that vein at all. I think the earliest movies, so you've got stuff like the Lost World, the original Lost World, the silent film version, and King Kong, so Roy Harryhausen type stuff. It was all man versus nature, and also a little bit of like colonizing. You had this taming of wild animals and also sort of civilizing of people, which doesn't age well.
Right.
Taking things back as prizes.
See, I kind of think that that's one of the subtexts of Jurassic Park, because Crichton was fear of science. I think he was fear of the hubris of privilege. And so, like, I'll talk about this later as well, but his films that were made out of his books, and the one that he directed himself, Westworld, are kind of flip of coin. If you take a look at Jurassic Park and Westworld, they have the same kind of storyline, but the Westworld is kind of taking a comment on indulgence of sex and violence in films in the 70s, or the indulgence in sex and violence on society and it becoming normalized. And so he talks about the dangers of that, and that you could find a way to do that by the technology. I don't look at the technology as the issue as much in Jurassic Park. The technology is the reason that a mogul who's never touched dirt in his life is going to make this dinosaur world. And
the dark Walt Disney.
Yeah, the dark Walt Disney. It's funny that, for the first Westworld's like Las Vegas, and the Jurassic Park is more of that, I'm middle-aged and I have a little bit of spending money, and you know what, I'm going to go to Disney World. And the idea of taking that, and really, you talk about cultural appropriation. You've got this thing of a epic appropriation. They're going to have these dinosaurs wear tap shoes and dance around, and it does not work that way. But I do think that there's something very ominous in his thoughts about human nature, and especially around the line of life finds a way. That's an ominous line. I mean, it sounds, people look at it not that way. It's kind of like the Police had that song, Every Breath You Take. People played that at their weddings, but it was really about nuclear extinction. And they just didn't listen. So like, I love the melody and Every Breath You Take. I get it. And it's the same kind of thing with this. I mean, you're basically saying that truth will come out, that no matter what you do, this is going to happen, and nature's not that nice. That's one thing that I ding Jurassic Park about. It's like they're just walking through like it's Busch Gardens or something. I'm like, you know how many poisonous, deadly, freaking nasty plants there are that you just walk out and you'd be dead. So it was obviously that wouldn't have been nearly as fun. But I would have liked to just have one Audrey 2 kind of thing from Little Shop of Horrors that was in there rather prominently.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry, I couldn't help because I love that movie. But go ahead. What else?
No, I appreciate that because I glazed over that piece of it, and it is definitely in there. And I think, like you say, it's in a lot of the movies. I'd say and it's also, we just saw a movie that's only 2 years old called The Dinosaur Project, which takes place in Congo.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still the same thing. It's like, oh, we're going to go exploring. Oh, there's dinosaurs. And then like, what are we going to do with the dinosaurs? And it's 100 years after this Lost World came out, and they're still just rehashing it.
You know, some of the tropes just hang forever. And that's because, you know, some people, they still believe in that fashion, so it just kind of comes naturally to them. But it's very interesting when you watch a movie and you go, "My God, this feels like this was." Are you sure this isn't like cuneiform that I'm watching? This is so ancient a thought, like Congo, another Crichton.
Mm-hmm.
Oh Lord, is Congo just? It's so backwards. And so insane in the end. I'm like, what was he thinking? You know, so much money was spent on that thing. And I was like, all they needed to do was like have a break in the middle where there's just a nightclub with people playing bongos and, you know, one singer that was very popular in the 20s singing a song about apes. And it would have been from the 30s. It was just, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. But I should say, even though I noticed that these tropes are like kind of terrible and dated, I still always enjoy these movies because anytime I just see a dinosaur depicted on screen, I'm like, yes, I just love watching them. And that Dinosaur Project movie actually did have relatively scary dinosaurs. I was surprised. It was like a decent scare factor to the movie. There was a scene, I think they were in a village, and there were all these pterodactyl-like things just like dive bombing, like trying to tear through the house.
Right.
And it was almost like the birds going.
Yeah. Well, they're not dinosaurs, but still.
True. Yes. Very true.
What's the most underrated dinosaur movie for feel, story, plot, enjoyment? And what's the best underrated dinosaur that you've seen in movies?
Oh, that's a good question.
Ooh, in movies. Well, I kind of feel like The Lost World is underrated now. It probably wasn't when it came out. It's a big deal.
Meaning the Jurassic Park Lost World or the Lost World silent film?
The silent film.
Gotcha.
From 1925. And there was something about it. We actually had a chance to see it during a silent film festival. And so they had an orchestra playing the entire music live throughout the movie, which I don't know if that made a difference, but maybe it did. It was really good. But yeah, seeing and just being able to appreciate the work that went into the movie with the kind of technology that they had in the 20s. I think it's really easy for us to forget that now when you look at things like Jurassic Park or Jurassic World with the CGI effects or all these other special things that we can do now because of computers and space.
Yeah, and it was weirdly like the reverse of a dated movie because we were watching and there were like some strong female leads and other elements about the storyline where you're like, wow, this is actually, I was expecting to be like, have some cringe moments, but there were very few. It was actually pretty good that way. And then it just had that stop motion that's we both love. It was just awesome.
Yeah.
And then what was the other one? Oh, dinosaurs. I would say that we still haven't seen a lot of the dinosaurs that we want to see in movies because there are so many weird, interesting dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah. Like Therizinosaur.
Yeah. So they showed, have you seen the latest Jurassic World movies?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
So there's a dinosaur that's just very briefly in the most recent Jurassic World movie. It's on a dock and they're trying to like hold it down basically with ropes. And it's got these claws that look like Freddy Krueger sort of claws for hands. And that's a real dinosaur. they found these claws. They're like 2 to 3 feet long, and it was an herbivore, but it had the largest claws of any dinosaur or any animal we've ever heard of. And we think they were just for self-defense. Like it was just eating plants, but then it had these massive talons. So if something messed with it, it could just tear into them. Mm-hmm. And it's never been in a movie. It's amazing that it's never been, other than this brief little pan shot, we've never seen a therizinosaur anywhere.
Right. Or some of the more bird-like ones with the feathers.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the feathers were probably colorful.
Yeah. They don't do enough with feathers either. We need to see more feathers.
One of them, like Microraptor, was similar to a crow, kind of, except with the bigger with teeth, and it was a little longer. The tail was longer and all that stuff.
It had 4 wings to go with it. So it's just like, they're these fascinating creatures. And, we should mention Dinochirus too. You said the Jar Jar Binks one. It had a hump on its back, like one huge Quasimodo hump. And it had huge arms. That was another one with massive claws. And they found the arms and claws first. They were on display at the American Museum of Natural History for decades.
50 years. They had no idea what the rest of the animal looked like. So there are all kinds of theories. Like, this must be the most terrifying dinosaur ever. And then they found the rest of it and like, this is just really strange.
It had a really wide gut and it didn't look like it could move very quickly. And then it had a big feathery like fan tail.
Right. It's an herbivore.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in movies, we see a lot of the same dinosaurs over and over, which is great too, because I love those dinosaurs. But yeah, there's so many new ones, especially discovered even in the last 20 years. We've doubled in the number of dinosaurs that we know about now, and it'd be great to see more of those.
Yeah, rather than just the Jurassic Park set over and over again.
So I just want to say to the listeners, if you're really enjoying what you're hearing on here right now and you're going, we'll get back to Jurassic Park, never fear. This is a double feature that we're doing here. This is a co-sponsorship of I Know Dino and Hellbent for Horror. And I'm going to be doing a second hour with the I Know Dino people directly for their podcast. And we will be cross-referencing. So if you have enough of this, you can get a little bit more as well, just a little bit from now. But since we're rolling, we just talked about Jurassic Park. We've all seen Jurassic Park. We know it doesn't end well. It's not a good park. But let's just say you had the ability, as lovers of the dinosaur, to make your own version of something like Jurassic Park, and you had the cash. What would it look like?
I think it would basically be a zoo. Or maybe like a nature preserve, like a large national park situation. And I'd just have them all mixed together. Probably. Might have to separate a couple of them if they couldn't hack it.
Right. Or some of the carnivores got too greedy.
Yeah.
So there was a mixture of different eras, right? Periods in Jurassic Park. What do you think would be like the most dangerous thing about that? Having things from different eras living like humans and dinosaurs. People think Fred Flintstone, right? But I think that would be a horrible, horrible existence.
I think did you want to say?
Oh, I was just thinking they wouldn't have evolved for each other to live around each other.
So I think it would be kind of like an invasive species where one of them would just wipe out the other ones pretty quickly. And I think Jurassic Park got it right. I think it would be T-Rex that's pretty much destroying everything. Because that thing, it literally was in a league of its own. The teeth that it had were designed for
crushing bones.
Crushing and exploding bone in a way that no other animal really does other than some large crocodiles. So it literally could just take bites out of animals and just tear through them like nobody's business. It wouldn't have had to do this thing that most animals do where they try to just eat the fleshy part. It could just gobble up a full head or neck or whatever.
Do you think that right there, you're talking about how the other dinosaurs could only nibble at the flesh. Do you think that's why there's so many, well, obviously the comet, if the comet theory is the true thing, why there's so many intact skeletons that are being able to be found? They died where they were, or do you think that it was also the thing of like, don't leave anything on the bone, but there's small little insect kind of things that are eating it away?
Yeah, I'd say it really depends on how the animal dies. So like you're saying, if it was really big, then you have a better chance of it not getting scattered by being eaten into little bits. But it's really hard to find a formation and have like just the geology that preserves a massive area and like a full dinosaur. So for bigger dinosaurs, we often just find a few bones because then it's harder to find enough area that preserves.
Unless they either drowned or were washed out to sea and then somehow some sand was able to cover them and protect them for the millions of years it took to fossilize.
Yeah, so the very best fossilization always happens basically in lakes with really fine sediment because it almost makes like a pressed flour sort of formation. And we get a lot of those out of China. So there's a lot of these small bird-like feathered dinosaurs. And that's actually where we discovered that dinosaurs had feathers, was from these amazing impressions of feathers from the fossilization. And those all must have just been things that got buried really quickly before anything had a chance to eat them, because they are relatively small. So otherwise, they didn't have a chance of getting fossilized properly.
Right. Well, see, this is what I love. This is how I know that you're extremely passionate about this. I ask a rather broad and strange question, and speculation starts going on. You know, oh, let's talk about the sediment at the bottom of lakes in China. I mean, that's not off the cuff or anything like that. So that's always fun to hear. So since you're on the passion juice as of right now, let's finish off with a bit of your passion. Say dinosaurs were on trial and you were the dinosaurs lawyer. In other words, talking to somebody who does not believe in them, does not like them, whatever. They're guilty of being monsters. What would you say to that jury as a closing argument?
Ooh.
Oh, man. So are we going with that they're monsters? Is that what we're arguing against?
Well, you can say it's probably that they're monsters. Let's say that they're the misunderstood monsters, and you want to talk more about how it's being seen from one small facet.
I would go with the family angle, I think. And this idea that they're just like most other animals, and they, especially with the more monstrous types, the carnivores, like they're just protecting their young, teaching their young, making sure that they have a place to grow up and they'll be able to fend for themselves and find food and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the analogies, right? So you've got, like, do you think of a lion as being a monster? Or do you think of an eagle bringing back food for its little baby chirping eaglets? Is that a monster? It's all kind of the same vein.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for all of this stuff. There's quite a bit of information in here. I hope that everybody's been enjoying this. I want to thank Garret and Sabrina from I Know Dino for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This has been a lot of fun.
So tell the listeners how they can follow your work.
So the best place is if you listen to podcasts, just search for I Know Dino or Dinosaur Podcast. We're on there. Our website's also iknowdino.com.
Yeah. Those are the places.
Yeah, and then we have links to everywhere else you'd have if you wanted to find us anywhere else.
Well, great. And I know that one of the best things that I feel from being a diehard fan of what I'm passionate about is that it doesn't matter having it. You got to give it away. You want to try and find your own brethren. So are there any other resources that you'd point to for those that are curious about dinosaurs too? And they are inspired by the fact that you guys just started and you are where you are now.
Do you want me to?
Oh, sure.
I would say the place that I usually point people to is this online free course called Dinosaurs 101, I believe is the name of it. Mm-hmm. There are some others too that have come out since then, but there are these really great online classes that they'll show you all these dinosaurs and you can take little quizzes if you want to or whatever, but it gives you this fundamental understanding of what dinosaurs were like, where they lived, how they lived, all that really fascinating stuff that a lot of people want to know.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again to Garret and Sabrina from I Know Dino. And I want to thank you, the listener, for your continued support in my bad behavior. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. And until next time, stay hell-bent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.